Welcome everybody again after lunch. Hopefully everybody stays awake.
We have coffee.
That's good.
Yeah.
Perfect. So this is our workshop on the right to live, abortion prevention. We started this morning talking about abortion from a Spiritist view. Then we moved on to talk about how abortion is dealt with in Canada in terms of legislation. So thank you, Louise and Sonia, for those presentations. Now after lunch, we'll go into the numbers. So statistics about abortion, and we'll start with abortion worldwide, stats and numbers across the globe with some key facts. Then we move on to Canada, so we're more focused, and then we can relate to what Sonia talked about. And then at the very end, I'll give a real life experience that came from a woman in Quebec when she went through an abortion, and she described the process that she had to go through. And it's quite awakening, I guess, when you hear what she had to say. So the first thing was making a connection to what Sonia was talking about. This is the globe. If you look at all the countries here, and in green, this is where abortion, there's no restrictions to abortion. So most developed countries, they don't have a restriction against abortion. As you go into developing countries on the south here, that's where you start to get more restrictions around abortion, either to preserve health or only to save a woman's life, or in some cases it's prohibited entirely.
There's only one country,
Yeah.
Africa, where it's completely prohibited? Because I only see one tiny gray on
Oh, the grays
top
are
there in
available.
Is
Africa.
that available?
Sorry.
Oh,
grays
okay,
are
so no
available.
information.
Yeah,
Okay,
they
okay.
don't have it. So we'll start with worldwide, and most of you have seen this already, but any idea on how many abortions go through in the entire world per year? Cut out, I guess.
Oh, you're the only one.
You're the only
Not allowed
one.
to guess.
And the people watching.
Yeah.
Everybody's watching online. Yeah. So when you think about the globe, the entire world, we're looking at an average of 56 million abortions every single day, or every single year. And this was the statistics that we found from 2010 to 2014. And just as a disclaimer, as I start talking, all the statistics that I found worldwide, so anything that refers to the world, is based on an institute called the Guttmacher Institute in New York. It's a very respectable institute for abortion. They don't deal only with abortion, but they also talk about sexual preventive health. So it's abortion, pregnancies, teenagers who need help. And this organization is quite well known, and is what the World Health Organization uses as their basis for their campaigns and things like that with abortion. So they refer to this institute to get their data. So that's why I chose to use them. And this was a suggestion from Renata, actually. When you think about this number, 56 million abortions, when you look at World War II, and from the entire length of the war, there were roughly 50 to 56 million people died directly from this war, right? So it's like we're having the same size of World War II every year in terms of abortion. This is how many deaths happen. An unborn child every year across the globe, which represents 25% of all pregnancies across the globe. So for every 4 pregnancies, right, we have 1.
It's insane.
It's insane. It's a quarter of all abortions, of all pregnancies end up in abortion.
And that doesn't even encompass the numbers. They are not counted, like they're not counted in.
So, thank you. And another disclaimer here too is this institute, they do all this research, but in a lot of countries where abortion is illegal, they have to run polls and do research based on a sample size and then escalate it to the entire population.
And even I think countries where it is decriminalized, I think there's also, I believe from people that I know,
Mhm.
there's also some that do not get registered because it's a married woman and,
Oh, absolutely.
and she doesn't want anybody to know, so there are those too. So
Yeah.
it's even more that doesn't get accounted for.
And like Sonia was talking about, it started at hospitals and then it opened to clinics, but then there was a period there that clinics, they didn't have to report the number of abortions, so
Yeah.
it is very not as accurate as we'd like. Now, when we look at trends, talking globally, we actually have improved a little bit in terms of abortion. So when you look at, this is the statistic they use to report abortions, so they always talk about number of abortions per 1,000 women. It's not pregnant women, just women in general, between the ages of 15 and 44. So for every 1,000 women, we used to have 40 abortions per 1,000 in 1990 to 94, and then 10 years later, this number actually decreased to 35. So it seems like it's going in the right direction.
It's interesting to see that from 1989, 88 here in Canada, abortion was decriminalized
Mhm.
and was decreased. The number of abortions decreased.
Okay.
Right, there is a connection between
I'll show
those
you.
points.
No, it actually went the other way around, but I'll show you. Yeah, this will come.
I don't know if you have that ahead, because my memory is bad.
Mhm.
Or even if you know the answer to this question, because it just occurred to me. Is there any connection between, for example, after decriminalization, if there have been, for example, more resources for support, and that's one reason it could have gone down?
Oh, it
Because
didn't.
people might have more information now
So
or something?
It didn't go down.
Oh, okay,
So I'll
okay,
show you.
all right.
But no, that I haven't found anything.
Yeah, I just thought about that connection, but if it didn't go down,
No,
there
yeah,
is no connection anyway,
yeah,
so.
we'll see soon. So yeah, in the world, it has decreased a little bit, but the population is increasing around the world. So if you look at abortions overall, it has some numbers, but as a rate.
But not as percentage.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Now, when you look at developed and developing countries, there is quite a difference between developed and developing countries. It could be due to the research, but we can't say for sure. But the annual abortion rate is now higher in developing regions, so 37 per 1,000 women, than in developed regions, 27 per 1,000 women. So you can see in the developed countries, so the region in green that we saw on the map before, there's actually less abortions. And there's no real reason, nobody can pinpoint why that is. Personal opinion is mostly on education, prevention of unintended pregnancies, which we'll see a little bit later. And the abortion rate has declined by 41% in developed countries in the last few years, since 1990, but has remained roughly the same in developing countries. And we'll actually see some numbers very soon. Now, after we talked about developing,
Victor, sorry, and just in the previous slide,
Yeah.
Although I see this trend on coming down the numbers on the developed countries, we don't see this in Canada. We don't see this drop of 41% in Canada specifically, do we?
No, we didn't. From 1990, we did see a marginal drop of maybe 5%, but no, it hasn't.
Just in Canada?
Just in Canada, since 1990. I'll show you the graph.
Because this is the 41% is like a world.
Yeah, it's a world statistic, and the States has reduced, Australia has reduced, and Europe actually has reduced quite a bit. You can see. But no, in Canada it has not reduced by 41. Now, Carol, I actually have a question for you. When you think about marriage, do you think you'd have abortions more in married couples, or sorry, a woman that's married or a woman that's single?
I think if you're asking me that, maybe you think I'm gonna say that it's mostly for single women, but probably it's the other way around.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Very good powers of deduction.
That's, it's a tricky question, so maybe it's the other
Yeah, good powers of
way.
deduction. It's like,
And that's what I thought too, right? You think when a woman, she's not married, she's single, she doesn't have the support of a family, that she would be more inclined to abort. But actually, in the global standards, we have 35 per 1,000 women for married women and 26 for unmarried women. So it's actually quite a bit larger in married women, so much so that 73% of all abortions worldwide, or 41 million, were obtained by married women.
Well, I personally can see why the married woman have more abortions than the unmarried woman. And since the 90s or the 2000s, basically because people who are not married usually use more protection, such as condoms and other things. And married people don't, so then it could be a cause as well. Usually, unmarried people, the woman use the pills, and married woman not necessarily. So I think it's more related to the world we live in right now. Single people usually try to keep more protected, even more because the sexual diseases. So that's my point of view on this.
Yeah, that could be very, very
Makes
true.
sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And so now just a table with actual numbers. So if we look at the world here, this is again abortions per 1,000 women, and then here we actually have the percentage of overall pregnancies. This is how many abortions we go through. So this is the world. So you can see how it has reduced from 40 to 35 in the past 10 years' time. Now, if you compare developed and developing countries, that's what we saw. So there has been a significant reduction in developed countries. In developing countries, it hasn't reduced significantly, and this is inherent to the type of research, because developing countries, it's based on a sample size. There's a disclaimer, down below that talks about it's not statistically significant, because the difference is so close that it hasn't changed, just based on the type of research that it's done.
the margin of error is
Exactly.
higher than the difference there.
So it's not significantly different. Now, when we look at actual countries, so this is where we saw some reductions. So, and they were classified as developed countries. Most parts of Asia, Europe, and North America, you can see a decrease in abortion. But when you look at Latin America and the Caribbean, this is where we actually now currently have the highest rates of abortion.
Increased.
Roughly 32% of all pregnancies end up in abortion in that area. So it's quite, and Latin America would include Mexico down. Okay, North America is just the States and Canada. And so those are some numbers. You know, unintended pregnancies, and this might be something that links to what Eric was saying, that pregnant married women, they might have more unintended pregnancies because they don't try to avoid it as much. But around the world, there was an estimated 99 million unintended pregnancies that happen every year. And out of these unintended pregnancies, 56% end. So more than half unintended pregnancies end up. And this is mostly equates to almost all of it. Because if you are intending to have a child, this shows that you won't abort. So if your pregnancy is unintended, there's more than half the chance that you will end up in abortion.
And again, that's because we're not counting the ones that go undetected.
Oh, yeah.
It could be higher.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything, but I'm pretty sure you would. Because
Or even those that were planned pregnancies, but then they detected some problems with the fetus, or they decide to end the pregnancy afterwards too.
yeah, there's still a couple million. Do the math here, there is a couple million still of planned pregnancies that would end up.
Couple million. So much.
It's so much.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Victor, did you go through any possible numbers that relate women who died during the procedure of abortion?
Yes, I only have that number for developing countries, because that's where usually they have to go through illegal ways. Yeah, I do have a number for that. It's not
Okay.
I'll touch on that too later.
Oh, good. Hopefully we're on the right page. So this is just a graph, again, from the Scott Mocker Institute in the States that talks about unintended pregnancies, which is what Eric was talking about. This one doesn't talk about whether or not they're married, but it talks about regions of developing and developed countries. So in undeveloped countries, mostly Africa and Latin America, the amount of unintended pregnancies that happen per 1,000 women. So there's roughly 100 for every 1 in 10 women in Latin America and in Africa have an unintended pregnancy, whereas it's almost half of that in developed countries such as Europe, North America, and Asia. So again, this goes back to education and whether or not they have access to preventive ways of preventing pregnancy. So this could be the leading cause of why abortion is higher in developing countries. Nobody is able to pin down exactly why, but I'd say this is a very good statistic showing that it could be that abortion is higher in developing countries because they're more unintended pregnancies.
The trends lead to the
Yeah.
conclusion, right?
Yeah. And there it is. So nearly 7 million women in developing countries are treated for complications from unsafe abortion. So they do it in an unsafe manner, and then they have to go to the hospital to treat them. And this is 7 million of them. And 22 die from abortion-related complications every year in developing countries. Not only did you kill the fetus, but also.
So let's say in 7 million, we have just 22,000 that really would follow that possible risk of life, right? And also is this just based in unsafe abortions or any abortion like in a specialized clinic here in Calgary, for example?
No, in Calgary, I haven't found any reports of it actually causing somebody to die.
This is just developing countries.
Yeah.
This is what.
I looked for like deaths because of abortion. I didn't find any statistics.
Okay.
Deaths from
Okay, gotcha.
because
Okay.
it is.
And if we think about how abortion is commercialized here in Canada, for example,
They will not.
I don't think they want these numbers getting out, right? Because they want women to feel safe
Mhm.
doing that. So maybe one of the reasons why we don't have numbers like those disclosed is because it's commercial here, right?
Market.
It's a market, yes.
So, and I was watching some videos on YouTube about that. And there was this lady talking about a woman that went to the clinic, to the abortion clinic, to have the medical abortion, and they started the process. The baby, the fetus was died, and she had to finish the abortion in a hospital because they said that in that clinic they didn't have all the all the resource enough to protect her to finish
Okay.
the procedure. So she ended up going to the hospital to have all the procedures done.
Yep.
And she asked to see the baby afterwards. And she was so regretted because it was a baby, but totally formed. So some clinics, they commercialize, saying that it'll be simple, it'll be just a medical procedure, but sometimes it's not that quite simple, as they say.
Thank you so much.
And Luis told us some of the reasons why, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Restricted versus non-restricted. This is a line from this institute from research. They say you can't pinpoint the abortion rates. They're not significantly different in countries where it's legalized or restricted, and whereas in countries that are not broadly legalized. Worldwide, we'll see in Canada what the trends say. Okay, but worldwide, this is what's out there for people to know. So they can't say that if you legalize or if you restrict, you'll have less abortion. This is the word that's out there. I'm not saying this is how it happens, but this is what they're broadcasting. And once we get into Canada, we'll be able to maybe draw some conclusions from the actual numbers. And I wanted to show you guys, just to maybe bring it home, because when we talk 56 million abortions, we don't really know, we can't really grasp what that is. So hopefully it's a clock of how many abortions that happen. Oh God, sorry.
Okay, maybe if you refresh. Oh, there's, yeah, no, it's working. Was working.
Come on. 1 second here. Crashed it. Crashed it.
The question.
Well,
Okay,
maybe I won't be able to show it. Nope. Yeah, I guess I won't be able to show you, but I just want to say that since I started talking, the past roughly.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, not really.
Thanks, Sophie.
Well, it was just a clock showing how many abortions happen. And basically, there's more abortions per second. You can see an abortion happening faster than a second. Which means that since we started talking, since I started my presentation, there's been more than 800 abortions.
Wow.
Since I started talking. So that's what 56 million mean.
Wow.
Let me go back to where I used to be. Okay. So I took 30 years. This is when I was born. So since I was born, based on 54 million abortions every year, the last 30 years have been 1.5 billion just in the last 30 years. And what's 1.5 billion? 1.5 billion is the equivalent of the entire country of China. This is how many babies didn't get born because they were aborted. It's also equivalent to 2 Europes. So if you think about all the countries in Europe, all the people in Europe, multiply by 2, this is how many babies weren't born just in the past 30 years. And to bring it home a little for those of you, those of us who are from Brazil, that's 8 entire nations of Brazil that again were born just in the last 30 years. So it is quite a bit, and this is again only in the last 30 years, so very recent. So now that we talked about the world, we'll actually talk about a little bit of Canada, and I'll touch on statistics, talk about numbers, how it has increased or decreased after changes that we've had in the law in Canada. And I'll start with one statistic here. This is how the baby looks, or how the prenatal development happens in the womb from 4 weeks, 24, obviously gets further out, but I wanted to show just these because this is how the research shows here. So the highest incidence is here, around 9 to 12 weeks. So almost half of all the abortions in Canada happen around here. So you can see, even from 9 weeks, you can see the head. Here at 12, you can see it's the person. And when you do an ultrasound in a baby, at 6 weeks, you can already hear the heart beating in an ultrasound. Right? So more than half of all, actually 60% of all abortions happens after the heart's already beating. It's really hard to say that it's not a human being, right? The heart's already beating. 40% happen before 8 weeks. Still, right? Actually, sorry. From this statistics here, pretty much every single abortion happens once the heart's beating. We don't have it. We don't go down prior to 6 weeks, but we can safely say that the majority of abortions, they happen once your heart's already there. Already beating. We're going to talk about age. And this, I guess, relates to some of the marriage that we're talking about. This is a distribution between age, so 15 or less, it's only 2%. When we get higher in age, 25 to 29, this is the highest incidence of abortion. At this age, usually women are starting to get married as well. So we can see that perhaps this is another indication that married women, they do have more abortions than unmarried. This, to me, it was quite surprising too. I thought this would be the area where you see like substantially higher, but again, it's not. So it ties back to the married and unmarried statistics.
So this is for developing.
No, this is Canada.
This is-
Canada
Oh, this
now.
is Canada.
This is
Okay.
only
So
Canada.
that's fine.
Yeah, from now on. This is all Canada. And now we'll get to talk about what. Sorry. Let's get to talk about what you talked about, Sonia. And so here we have a number of abortions in Canada from 1970. So this is when they had the first number of abortion reported in Canada, and this was a year after. In Canada, they let abortions happen for people for whenever the life of the mother was threatened.
Yeah.
That's when abortion was allowed, which goes in line with what Luis was talking about from Spiritist. So after abortion was allowed, if it threatened a woman's life, this is how much it jumped. So it went from basically 10,000, the first year they did the research was 10,000 abortions, up to 70,000. We can see here that it started to reach a plateau, it started to become a little bit stable, and this was over roughly 4 to 6 years. So when I look at this, my guess was at this point we're probably reaching a plateau where if it threatens a woman's life, then we go to abortion. So hopefully this would have been the number of women that would have a pregnancy that was threatening their lives. And so if you're reaching a plateau, that usually means that right now it is something stable, and only the abortions that we're seeing are because they're threatening women's lives. But then when we go to 1988, which is when this law was declared unconstitutional against the Charter of Rights, then you don't have any more laws regarding abortion. That's when we can see a huge jump, adding roughly, if you look here, that's roughly 30,000 extra abortion that's happening just because of that lack of law on abortion. So you could draw the conclusion from here that roughly 30,000 abortions were happening with a healthy pregnancy. This number, there was a spike here in roughly 2012, 2013, but it has been slowly decreasing, and hopefully in a few years we'll see this decrease a little bit further. But it seems like we've reached a peak, and so far it has been decreasing a little bit. So it is somewhat good news. Now, you can start thinking the population of Canada in 1970 was roughly 21 million. We're sitting at 37 million now. So you can say, well, the increase was due to population. It's not a population increase, that's why we're having more abortions. But in fact, on the top there, this is how many pregnancies happen in Canada. So this was actually surprising to me. Even though populations have almost doubled, the amount of pregnancies in Canada hasn't increased.
Right?
It's stable.
It's very stable.
It's stable. And this is, all these numbers are from Statistics Canada. And I did some math here, and yeah, this is like a straight line. It doesn't change. It sits around roughly like 350,000 pregnancies across, and abortion has only increased since then. Now it's starting to decrease again, but again, we can't say that now we have more abortion because we have more people. We have more abortion because we're actually going to more abortions for every pregnant woman. So to me, this was a surprise. This was a very big surprise. Again,
It is.
you can see that plateau here,
Again,
but then you remove the law, and then you jump again, roughly
Yeah,
30 to 40,000.
spike in
extra.
2012.
Yeah. I don't know if this has to do with any economic crisis or anything, but
This is the year 2012, I don't know if it has something to do with it, but this is the year when they tried to pass that motion about whether a human fetus,
what is a human?
yeah, it's
when does life start?
yes, when the life started,
That's true.
because maybe
It's
they
like
felt that the abortion was increasing, so they tried to
Oh, okay. Pass something.
pass something to like an awareness to the control, yeah.
Even though the motion has not passed, but like if that's related to it, the numbers are going a little bit low down. Yeah, maybe people could start reflecting about it.
Yes.
And I'm sure we'll keep talking about abortion as years go by, so hopefully we can see this trend slowly decreasing. And this is one of the reasons why we're here, right? We're doing these talks, we're having these seminars, so we can hopefully see this drop here. So when we talk provinces, the highest incidence of abortion is Ontario. This is strictly due to population.
But they are the most popular.
Yes. Now, when you look at per pregnancy, Quebec is the one with the highest incidence of abortion. So the highest rate of abortion in Canada historically has been in Quebec. Yeah, British Columbia in the past years has been pretty close to Quebec, sometimes even more so than Quebec. But historically, Quebec has been the worst one. Saskatchewan has been one of the better ones with a quantifiable population where you have like more than 1 million people. Saskatchewan has been the better, or the best one for abortion. They have the least amount. Us here, we're sitting at 12,000.
It's really high.
It's really high. It's still really high when you think about the numbers. I couldn't find stats on Calgary. It goes down to a province level and it stops. And we're just a little bit better than the national average, which is why we're bringing on the next slide here. So it's important to understand here that this is the number of births per abortion. So if you look at Alberta here, we started back in 2007. For every 4 pregnancies, there was 1 abortion. Okay, and we have been. So this graph, as you go up, this is better. Because we're having less abortion. So we reached a peak of 4.5 abortions, 4.5 births per abortion. You know, when you look at Quebec in 2007, for 3 births, there was 1 abortion. So that's 33%. Whereas Alberta was 25%. That's a whole other woman pregnant that didn't get an abortion.
Seems marginal, but it seems it's improving a little bit in Quebec, right?
Yeah,
Very little.
very little, but it is. If you draw a trend in Canada as a whole, here, British Columbia for some reason in 2010 was really good for abortions. It didn't have a lot, so I didn't want to put that in here because none of the data is correct. Because it goes back to the clinics when British Columbia decided to run the clinics. They didn't have to report it for a few years, so I didn't put it here because it might be somewhat skewed.
And there was a drop there.
Yeah, because British Columbia started reporting their clinics, so it went up and then went down, right? So overall, it seems like it has been increasing. It's going back to what it used to be in 2007. Hopefully, we see this keeps growing. And we're having less and less abortion. So yeah, the only thing about this graph is you've got to think about it opposite.
Yeah,
The lowest, the more abortion.
Yeah, when you say you want to see the numbers high, in that case, the success, the pregnancies should go to term instead of abortion.
Exactly. So this is number of births for abortion. Now, these are all the numbers that I have in terms of statistics. And now I'll enter there was this Margaret Somerville. She works for McGill. She's the director of the McGill Center for Medicine, Ethics, and Law. And she, back in 2012, she published a study that she did on abortion. And it had the description of one lady in Quebec who went through abortion. And she did a profile on this lady, and she told us how her experience was through abortion. So we'll go through this. I apologize, but I'll actually have to read the notes because there's quite a bit. I didn't put all the words on the slide because it's too much. So it goes like this. I've just had an abortion, and I'm terribly upset. I'd like to tell you about it. Her story is tragic. Anna, that's what the woman's been called. That's not her real name. Anna explained, everyone in Quebec thinks that abortion is normal. Nothing to fuss or to be upset about. The obvious and easy solution to an unplanned pregnancy. So it's almost like it's second nature. If you have an unplanned pregnancy, if you don't want it, just take it out. That's the consensus. Yeah. But when she unexpectedly found herself pregnant, she didn't feel that way, actually. And she sought support to continue the pregnancy. So she was saying that she didn't feel that it was right to get an abortion. So she went out there to get help from other people and see what other people thought. And we would imagine that people would have helped her, right, to not abort. In fact, everyone told her, however, to get on with it. That was the phrase that she used. Get on with it. Have an abortion. So stop mulling over. Stop thinking about it. Just do it. Just forget about it, and in 2 weeks you don't even. And that's how it is. That's what the culture is. That's what the consensus is around the area, and that's just one of the reasons why in Quebec it has been historically the highest rates of abortion. So Anna first asked her mother whether she would help her if she had the baby, and her mother flatly refused, saying, okay, I do not want to waste my life babysitting. Her male partner said he wasn't interested in the kid, and the relationship has since broken up. She tried to get an appointment with her gynecologist to discuss her options, but the first available one was in 2 months. So she had to wait for 2 months to get an appointment with her gynecologist. So she contacted an abortion clinic.
Which I'm sure answered very quickly.
Exactly. And the abortion clinic nicely had an appointment in just 2 weeks. And so Anna went to this abortion clinic, and she was 9 weeks pregnant at the time. Again, heart was already beating. And she said, I went to them to get information on abortion, to know more about my options and the consequences of abortion. Now, if you think about clinics, like we're talking about an abortion clinic is a business, right? You go to like a BMW dealership, asking for options whether or not you should buy a BMW, they're going to try to force your BMW for sure, right?
Which is funny enough because for anybody who had children here in Canada, when you take your baby to be vaccinated in a vaccination clinic here in Alberta, they explain what each vaccine does in detail, give you pamphlets, and then they ask you, are you sure you want to vaccinate your child? But they don't have a problem recommending an abortion.
Yeah. So yeah, she went to this clinic trying to get to know the consequences, try to know her options, and she said I was open to getting an abortion because that was what everyone around me recommended I do. I saw abortion as an option, but I was really not sure. I was just hoping for some answers. She went to the clinic just to get some answers. Anna met first with the nurse for the consent interview. That's the first thing you have to go through. And like Sonia said, consent doesn't need anybody. As long as they see that the pregnant lady is it's okay with their mental health is okay, that you can get a consent. She said, the nurse told me that at this stage of the pregnancy, the fetus is just a bunch of cells. This is word by word what she heard. I also asked her if the abortion would have any impact on my health, my future pregnancies, and so on. She said abortions had no impact at all, no consequences at all, and that all I had read in the news was just a myth. There was no consequences, and she even said in 2 weeks it'll be as if all this never happened. So in two weeks you'll forget about it, and it's like you never did anything. Anna changed into her hospital gown and was taken into an examination room where a technician proceeded to do an ultrasound. Anna asked what the fetus looked like and if she could see the ultrasound, and the technician told her that she was not allowed to show the images and was unable to see the screen. This is a policy, it's not a law, it's from the policy from the clinic, but she was not able to see her baby.
It's cruel.
Right? And what I thought about it, when you think about Spiritism, like if you do see the baby on ultrasound, if you see a picture, that hopefully will reach your conscience, right?
Yes,
You'll get to your inner
Just
conscience.
heard
The heartbeat.
Hearing heartbeat.
Yeah, right. Just hearing the heartbeat would do that.
It's magical. First time you hear a
Yeah.
baby's heartbeat, it's magical.
There
So
you go.
fast.
And that's where it touches, right? But this is what they're trying to avoid, because again, they're trying to sell abortion.
Again, yeah, because they actually have it's almost like they have a plan to, they know what
Oh, yeah.
to change the mother's
Mind, yeah.
mind, and then let's set up the ideal.
It's kind
Or
of a
not.
trap.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anna says she was left alone in the waiting room before the nurse took her to the operating room, where they gave her a sedative injection. At that point, she said she was just crying. I was just thinking of all the reasons people told me I had to get an abortion, and that I did not have any help anyways, so I was crying. The doctor asked me if I was here on my own, and under my own will, and she said yes. She was there on her own will while crying. So again, what Sonia said, they gave me a double dose of sedative to calm me down. So that stage, she was like reaching her conscience not to do it, and they completely numbed it, completely stopped it with chemicals. prevent her from going back.
And she's by herself, she has
Yeah.
double sedative.
And
So
that,
how are you gonna go home? Here you go do an endoscopy, you can't, if you take the sedative, you can't leave by yourself.
at that point, she felt it was pointless to protest further, and that she couldn't back out at that stage, and she just closed her eyes and let the abortion proceed. Just a couple more, and this is on the showing the picture. So in the States, in the United States, actually, as part of the consent, this is one of the things that they ask. They are shown a picture of the baby.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, there was not a motion or an idea of actually preventing people to be, or mothers to be shown their ultrasound until 30 weeks of pregnancy. Now, their reasoning was that actually a lot of abortion in Canada is due to sex, gender. So when they find this is the gender they do not want because of cultural backgrounds, they actually abort. So in Canada, they had to get to this point of preventing people from seeing their fetuses to avoid gender-related abortion.
But I have heard this
Yeah,
from
I've heard
different
this.
people, like if you are like from a Chinese background or
Yeah.
Indian background, they may not, I don't know like if it's something that it's just guidelines for them or if they should not, but I don't know how that works, but I have heard many stories.
In some cultures, it's the son's job to look after
Yeah.
their parents
So
when they're
when I
older, so a
choose-
girl is
yeah.
not interesting.
Or I already have.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so yeah, I'm reaching my last two slides. So every day in Canada, across Canada, 300 women will go through an abortion. Some because they feel they have no other choice, and others will look back and say they might have made a different decision. Only someone had been there to support them. Right? And this is what Sonia suggested me to show. There are quite a few places in Canada and Calgary and Alberta that offer help. They offer help for pregnant ladies that can't make meets ends, that they need help with money, they have to finish school when they're pregnant. So there are associations that help with that. There are also associations that help with after abortion. So if you've gone through an abortion and now you're feeling depressed, there's help for that as well. And us as well, very much one of the things that we have.
I think that this is a quite important subject, Victor, because if I well remember when I was studying this topic in the past, I think the numbers of depression after the abortion are huge. Like I would say, I don't remember by heart now, but if I well remember, the numbers were above above 90%. So it is something to think about. Why so many people get depressed after doing something that they wanted to do, right?
Yeah. And I saw a study done in Finland. I didn't want to show it because it wasn't relatable to Canada, but yeah, they said that in Finland that they're 5 times more likely to develop depression if they go through abortion. So yeah, there are statistics about that as well. So thank you guys very much. And now we're having Renata.
You.
Renata.
Nice
to meet you, Renata.
Circumstances.
Circumstances.
So much.
Oh, thank you. That was very informative.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. All right. So, in our last workshop, this part was done by Luis, and I remember Luis talking about how heavily it weighed on him to study all the consequences and look at all the examples of what happens in the spiritual world when we decide to go through with a big mistake. And I feel you. I totally feel you, because studying to prepare this presentation was very informative, not necessarily with numbers and statistics, but the Spiritist literature is really rich in examples of what happens after we make such big mistakes. So it is, my bibliography alone has 3 pages. So I will try to summarize as best as I can. And it's very important to understand, there is a slide about it, but I'm going to start by saying that it's very important to understand that the reason why it's so difficult to summarize, the reason why it's so difficult to be concise, is because every case is a case. And that's why we have so many examples, because there's no hard rule. There's no every time you do this, this is the consequence. And we will see why. But here today, we are going to see just some examples and what the good Spiritist literature tells us. Reliable mediums, reliable spiritual authors bring us as example, okay? And like I said, the bibliography is 3 pages. Feel free to take a picture and go back and read, because most of the either case studies or just explanations are long reports, because it needs, again, every case is a different case. So every time you're reading about one example or one explanation, we need to understand the background behind the situation, what happened, and then the possible future consequences. So they are all long reports that I highly recommend everybody reads, because it is highly informative. So we're going to start talking about the basic types of abortion or miscarriage. And that's the first thing when we think about language. English, I would say, is a bit more forgiving when we think about judgment of the word. English is a bit more forgiving when it calls, because in Portuguese we say spontaneous or natural abortion versus provoked abortion. But in English, for the spontaneous abortion, they have a word that is miscarriage, which simply means that the woman was not able to carry the pregnancy and the baby to term, to the end, okay? Then there's actual abortion, and we can even divide abortion into categories as well. We can divide it in unconscious abortion and intentional abortion. One interesting thing, and we're going to understand this in a few moments, is that the unconscious abortion many times, or even most times, is mistaken as a miscarriage. Many cases that are considered a miscarriage are not a miscarriage. They are actually unconscious abortions. So let's understand. And again, everything is so intertwined, because it depends on the type of abortion. It depends on what possibly caused it. So it's like a number of combinations of facts. And again, that's why every case is a different case. So we're going to try and cover as much as we can. So let's talk about the possible cause. And we're going to keep going back to all these words after. So possible causes. One of the possible causes, usually of miscarriage, is the malformation of the reproductive system. right? And the reproductive system, here we're talking about not just our physical organs, but we are also talking about imbalance in our chakras. Okay? And we're gonna go back to what can cause the cause. What can cause the malformation of the reproductive system. Because sometimes, yes, because sometimes the cause of the abortion is an effect of a previous cause, of a previous opportunity that a mother or a father missed of welcoming a spirit into the world. So sometimes the cause of the abortion is the effect
The physical
of
cause is
a previous. Then we go into the provoked or intentional abortion. It can be caused by use of chemical substances like the next day pill, the morning pill, or any other abortive medicine. And I think we've all heard about cases where people, women who were pregnant, simply took a medication that they knew could cause the abortion. It wasn't even for that purpose, but because it could cause the abortion, it was taken. Just an example, for example, are some types of medicine for ulcers or stomach problems will probably cause an abortion depending on how far along the woman is. So if someone can have access to that kind of medicine and take a high dose, there is a good chance that she could be provoking an abortion, and it's one of those who would never get registered, for example, that we would never hear about. Obsessive processes. Now, this one is also connected to that unconscious abortion that looks like a miscarriage, but only because we are not seeing the physical reasons for that, because the reasons behind them are obsession and obsessive processes. And we're going to talk more about that too. Now, again, connected to this and to the unconscious abortion. So sometimes an abortion is caused by a conscious or unconscious rejection from the parents or from the reincarnating spirit. Okay, somebody was mentioning, I think it was with the kids, and I heard somebody talking there. So sometimes it's the parents that reject, either just the mother or both mother and father, and sometimes it's the spirit who is afraid of the trial that they will have to face. And while the ties aren't too strong still, they still manage to break the ties. Okay? Okay, so who is involved in this whole story, or who is possibly involved in the whole story? Always, no question about it. Well, not always, because we have those cases when there are no spirits attached. Okay, so let's say.
That's a good point. I never thought about it.
Yeah. So most of the time, the spirit that is about to reincarnate, always the mother, always, sometimes the father, and sometimes doctor, nurse, midwife, or anybody who is helping the mother or even forcing the mother, because it does happen, to abort the baby. Midwife é parteira. Okay, and here in Canada they have doulas as well, which is
Yeah, so
kind of
it's
all in that area. It's all in that area. Okay, so here we have like who is involved, types, and possible causes. Now let's start mixing everything up and try to understand what certain combinations could result. what could be the result of some combinations, okay? So some of the possible consequences. Again, I love the word Vitor used, the disclaimer here, like the very first thing I said, very, very, very important to understand. And we've learned this in the Spiritist doctrine. The effect will always be in proportion to the intention of the action or of the cause. The cliche, it's the intention that counts. Oh, yes, it does. The intention does count. Intention, level of responsibility, of consciousness, all of that. So the effect will be in proportion to all of these aspects. This means that we can't state one specific action will always lead to an exact consequence. I saw some very, and this is me being judgmental, even though we should not judge, but I'm gonna use the word irresponsible. I saw a few irresponsible videos online of people stating, trying to answer questions, saying, and it said it was a Spiritist video about abortion. And then there's this one specific video of this guy who doesn't have, and of course this is in Portuguese, who doesn't have good Portuguese, good grammar. You can see that it's not a person who studied or anything, and it's a person who's there giving their personal opinion and trying to answer if you commit an abortion or if you have an abortion, are you going to umbral or not? And then this guy starts to talk about how if you regret, you're not going to umbral. If you don't regret, you are. It's very irresponsible to state something like that because there's so much more involved. There's always the intention, the level of consciousness. Just like any time we break a law, in this case, we're breaking a divine law because it is a crime. We are killing, right? A human being. So every time we break a law, both man's and God's law, there are attenuating and aggravating circumstances. So stating that every time this happens, the result will be that is irresponsible. We don't know what other facts are involved in the situation. So, having said that, during the first presentation, Luis helped us, showing us what the Spirit's book say. We've also read in the Gospel according to Spiritism about our conscientious duties. And I think it was in your presentation too, or one other presentation about conscientious duties. And we can find many examples in the Spiritist literature that illustrate the more common consequences and the explanation behind them. So like I said, they are usually long chapters, well, not super long, but too long to have everything in here. But a few minutes of reading will give us background, situation, possible consequences. So what we're going to bring here in terms of possible consequences are the most common that we can read in Spiritist literature. But again, aggravating, attenuating, every situation is different. And this comes from a website from a publisher called Editora Vivência. And unfortunately, it does not have the name of the author. It was posted on the website of the publisher. And the article is called Consequências Espirituais do Aborto. I was gonna copy the hyperlink, but then my internet crashed on me yesterday, said it couldn't find the website, and I couldn't go in. I'm like, okay. But if you look it up, Consequências Espirituais do Aborto, Editora Vivência, you will find it. So, always good, trustworthy, reliable, solid Spirit's book. Again, question 357 that we showed us, but we're gonna show it.
Actually, I let you show.
Thank you very much. It was by design. Perfect. Thank you very much. So, question 357. What are, for a spirit, the consequences of abortion? Because we talk about the mother. But remember, the spirit, when there's one linked to that body, which is most of the cases, what are the consequences for the spirit after the abortion? What do you think? We're gonna have to pick on you, Carol. What do you think could be the consequences for the spirit that was going to reincarnate? We always talk a lot about the mother or anybody else, but what about the spirit that was there? What happens?
I think it's, well, as you said, it's a case-by-case basis, but I think the main consequence was not able to complete the trial.
Hang on.
Like,
Oh.
It is a case by case, but this we can state. It's an existence that is null and must be commenced over again. So no matter how long it took to the mentors and architects and engineers on the other side to prepare both parents and that spirit, when either a miscarriage or an abortion happens, regardless of what happens, when that spirit is prevented from being born, for whatever reason, for that spirit, the consequence is that was no, and they must start all over again. So that's a statement, we're fine with that. Now we can go breaking it down. So, miscarriage. So, when we talk about miscarriage, there are numerous reasons. There are, let's say, infinite reasons, because every case is a case for miscarriage. Now, the miscarriage involves, so there are consequences for the spirit that is about to incarnate, which we just saw. It's null, não valeu, but I start all over again. There are consequences for the mother and for the father if he's in the picture, if the father is involved. Now, again, these consequences, and this we're talking about real miscarriages, not the unconscious abortion that can be confused. We're talking about real miscarriages. So there is a reason behind them, and we're going to talk about it. But the consequences of a miscarriage are what we were just talking about at the very end. For the spirit, it's null, but for the parents, feeling of guilt, and that's very common mostly for the mother. The feeling of uselessness, of inability to be a mother when all or many other women can, why can't I? That leads to doubt, to existential emptiness, sadness, ultimately to depression. And in some cases, because of all this, it might even lead to suicide. If it progresses to such a serious point, it could end up in suicide. It's not uncommon to see women committing suicide because of a miscarriage and the feeling that they are not a good woman or a good enough woman and couldn't have a child.
The feeling that they have to pay for the mistake too, right? So that's
for whatever mistake in the past, even if it was not connected to a previous abortion, because sometimes a miscarriage is exactly that, like we said before, malformation of the reproductive system as a consequence of abortions in a previous life or of sexual excesses as well, not necessarily an abortion, but some behaviors, some sexual behaviors that might have resulted in a complete imbalance of the reproductive system, of the genitals, of the sacral chakra and the base chakra as well. So all those imbalances, so could be an abortion, a previous abortion, in this life, in another life, and it could also be just a sexual behavior that was so intense that led to an imbalance in all the reproductive system.
Just side note here that I was thinking now, I have a few friends who had miscarriages, and I think it's so, you see how rich and how important it is to understand miscarriage, and also considering Spiritism, because it can light and explain how miscarriage works, because I believe the feeling of guilt when you have a miscarriage must be very
And emptiness,
strong, because I guess it's that feeling of, what if I haven't drank, I don't know, a glass of wine, I wouldn't have a miscarriage, or what if I haven't do this or that, or I think you have to deal with the guilt. It's very strong when you have a miscarriage. Some of them will be totally fine.
Yeah.
And okay, I did everything correctly. So this
and
was
many
out of
times it
control,
doesn't
but-
even come to a miscarriage. Sometimes it's just the difficulty to get pregnant. All those feelings of guilt and trying to pinpoint, why is this happening to me now? All that anxiety, all that guilt. And again, miscarriage is a very touchy subject because, again, every case is a case. And sometimes it's not connected to a previous mistake the mother made, but it's connected to the compassion and charity that the mother or the parents have to lend their body for a spirit to go through that experience. Spirits who have been in error before and that have damaged their spiritual body so badly that they have to go through an experience like this to start repairing their spiritual body. So looking for the reasons and the feeling of guilt, you're not necessarily guilty of anything. You might just have agreed to lend your body to help another spirit. So that's why I called that video I mentioned irresponsible. Because you could be putting guilt in the mind of a person who's not guilty of anything. We have to be careful with statements like this, right?
This example just showed us one more time that the life doesn't start when the child is born. Like the whole process of preparation for that spirit could just be necessary to go through that. I don't know the word intrauterine life to already finish whatever prepare on the next step to then maybe in another incarnation be able to fulfill the actual able to incarnate.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna keep moving because this is like 7.5, at least 23 plus 3 for the biography, and we don't have a lot of time, and I don't want to eat up time from Anna. So let's keep going. And this was just miscarriage, which is the simplest of the situations because we don't have as many variables as actual abortions. So let's keep moving. Let's keep learning. 355. Are there, as is indicated by science, children so constituted that they cannot live? And if so, for what purpose? Not or are they produced? And that one you had. So, but this links to what I'm going to say next, so that's why I'm repeating you. Thank you very much. That often happens. Such births are permitted as a trial, either for the parents or for the spirit appointed to animate. So like we just mentioned, sometimes it's for the spirit, not even for the parents. So trying to look for the guilt, or for a spiritist who believes in reincarnation, what did I do wrong last time? You might have, you might not. So abortion. So we are going to, in the book Missionários da Luz, most of us have studied, or at least talked about, the chapters that talk about Segismundo's reincarnation. How the architects, how the mentors prepare him, and at first his mother wanted to get pregnant, his father didn't, because Segismundo is an enemy from the past that the parents had agreed to welcome as their child. But then during the incarnation, the father started to become a little, I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't want it. Then the spiritual plane, during their sleep, was able to talk to the father, prepare him. He accepted to welcome Segismundo. The mother was already completely ready to welcome Segismundo. And it describes the moment of the connection of the soul after conception. And it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read in my whole entire life. This is a very well-known chapter, passage, or whatever in Spiritist literature. But what not many people talk about is the following chapter. The following chapter is called Failure or Fracasso. And that's exactly when they talk about a case, an example of unconscious abortion. Because then André Luiz Mentor says, you've seen a successful case. Now let's see one that was not successful, and let's see what could happen there. So again, it's I think 6 or 7 pages. But basically what that chapter describes is exactly what we saw as the last reason. A rejection from the parents to the reincarnating spirit. In that case specifically, and again, every case is a case. In that case specifically, the father wasn't even involved, because the mother actually separated from the father, and she was doing all the mess on her own. The father was not involved in the picture. And her name is Cesarina, so very, very quickly, she was on her 3rd pregnancy, and the 2 previous pregnancies were both unconscious abortions. When, because of her rejection of the fetus, of the spirit, she aborted. So again, because the ties were not strong enough, just the energy that she and her obsessors put into the process was enough to cause 2 unconscious abortions. Now she was on the 3rd pregnancy, and she was already 7 months pregnant. However, why did she separate from her husband? Because she needed to enjoy life. Party, drink, have fun. She wanted to have fun. And that's exactly what her obsessors wanted as well. To vampirize from all those excesses, right? And then, you really need to read it. I really recommend it. That you read it. Yeah, it's very detailed, and André Luiz says that he sees like little, like mental projections of like little monsters eating at the fetus energy in the water of the baby. It's very detailed. I really recommend it. There's so much in there that I had no idea could possibly happen. So it is absolutely amazing. But that's what it was. Her obsessors she didn't want the baby because she wanted to enjoy life, but she didn't necessarily hate the baby. The obsessors didn't want the baby because they thought that if the baby was born, her husband would come back, she might start loving the child, and she might decide to change her way of life, and then they would not be able to vampirize her energies anymore. So and of course it's called failure, so of course the ending is not a surprise. So she loses a baby being 7 months pregnant. So it might look as a miscarriage, but it was an unconscious abortion. Okay, so in that case, for when abortion happens, unconscious or intentional, what are some possible consequences for the spirit who is about to reincarnate? We already know that they will have to start again. Mute point, basic, no question about that. But what else? If it's a more evolved spirit who was, for example, trying to reincarnate to help the family, maybe to join the spouses in an effort to help raise the child or something. So if it was a more evolved spirit, probably, not always, but probably they would overcome the situation and wait for a next opportunity to reincarnate from that mother or from another mother. However, if it's a less evolved spirit, they may resent the missed opportunity and become an obsessor. Why? Because many times the spirit was either the victim or the torturer of the parents, and this was an opportunity through the tireless work of spiritual mentors to reconnect those who were his or her enemies. Then the maxim, love your enemies, was about to come true. As Jesus said, love your enemies. So the whole project was for them to love each other as a family. The mother would have a chance to love. Sorry, it was welcome. The mother would have a chance to welcome the child and love him or her. But now, with everything undone and destroyed, a long period of spiritual preparation, of love, and once again turned into hate by the spirit who was expelled through the abortion, unconscious or intentional. And many times this will result in a very long delay for that spirit because they become revolted. They were trying their best to love their enemies, but the moment they get rejected, they go back to the state of hate and then many times become the mother, the father, or both obsessors. Right?
Just,
Yes.
I won't take long, but between the previous slide, when you say the more evolved and the less evolved spirit, of course there is a range between, right?
Yeah.
And there is a case that Divaldo Franco actually describes of a woman had committed 12 abortions. One of the, I think that's the case, but one of them, like it was a spirit that tried 8 times on that same one.
The same spirit.
So again, maybe the first few times trying,
that spirit had to be pretty evolved.
Yeah, but yeah. So she ended dying of cancer, but there were obsessors.
Thank you. You already gave an example of something we're going to see in a bit, but thank you for the example.
Okay, so a quick example.
Yeah, on the shelf.
Yeah, there you go.
I've been presenting for only 34 minutes. Moa just gave me the sign that I only have 5 minutes, but my presentation says here 34 and 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, and this question anybody can answer, who has the biggest responsibility of all? The mother, right? Again, every case is a case, big range. If she is obligated, if she's made, or if it's a violence against her, different situation. Okay, we're talking about unconscious and intentional abortion. So the mother. So the consequences can be, and many times are, somehow still in the present incarnation, and almost invariably in the next, or nexts. There's no nexts in English, but you get my point. So abortion is not just an act of violence against the baby or the spirit, but it's also an act of violence against the woman. Even when they say it's safe, even when they say there is no consequences, there's no side effect or whatever, we are not looking at the chakras. We're not looking at the imbalance that the woman is provoking with such an action, right? And they damage both bodies, physical and spiritual as well. And of course, that has consequences. And many books, there are many in my long biography and many more that I was not able to look at because there are too many examples that say exactly that. It's very consistent throughout Spiritist literature. Both bodies get damaged, physical and spiritual. So the consequences can be physical or spiritual. Most times, many times, again, big range, immediate and or future. So again, combination of so many factors. So let's talk a little about the physical. So some possible consequences, right? So, and again, we can find many examples of physical consequences for the mother, but all sources are very consistent when they say that the results are both immediate and future. And the results can be diseases or conditions connected to the reproductive system. Again, in the same, like the example after 10 abortions, the cancer, or in a future life, right? So due to the damage they caused, ranging from numerous difficulties and or discomforts until the point of infertility, both present and future, right? So it can be, oh Lord, I don't know how to say those things in English, but after an abortion, we can have several problems with our uterus, or even with our genitals, or again, infinite possibilities, depending on the case, intention, previous history, so on and so forth. In the book Sexo e Evolução, Walter Barcelos says, even the woman who had an abortion, look at this, after having 1 or 2 children, will receive in the next incarnation, or can receive in the next incarnation, the disturbing symptoms of her crime exactly after her first or second child, the exact period in which she had an abortion the previous incarnation. So maybe the reflex can come at that same point in time in terms of how many children. And the book Evolução em Dois Mundos says the same thing with even more specificity, talking about HR negative factors that can lead to abortions as well. Sometimes they are connected to previous abortions in the previous life, sometimes, right? So more than one book, same information. So continue in the same book. Maybe, the women may become mothers, and now the italics is like word per word. So the mothers may become mothers of criminals and suicides. regenerating the energies of her pure spirit through the noble sacrifice with which she will devote herself to the tortured or unhappy children from her flesh that she gave birth to, learning to pay, to serve with nobility, and to mentalize the pure and healthy motherhood that she will regain at the price of fair suffering and work. So it's a way to value motherhood. Learning to love and pray for those who have fallen as well, maybe a different mistake, but through that love, they will repair the damage they did to their own pure spirits by learning to love that spirit. Some of the possible, and again, these are just some, there are more. Some of the possible spiritual consequences. Simple obsession. It's when we suffer influences in our thoughts, and many times we even interact with obsessors outside of the physical body, right? And they can be obsession by subjugation. It's when the influence becomes an interference and the willpower of the host, of the person who is being obsessed, weakens. Their willpower weakens and the will of the obsessor takes control, right? And this obsession by subjugation can also have physical and psychic effects, right? And or both. At the end, they become both physical and psychic. And here's the explanation. So the physical effects of obsession by subjugation are usually the organic cellular conditions that make contaminations by virus or bacteria easier and may lead to diseases. Our immune system goes down. And then we become physically more prone to diseases. The psychic effects of obsession by subjugation could be mental domination, and we who are obsessed by subjugation, we slowly give in to a state of passiveness, and sometimes we completely lose lucidity, right? Loucura total. Okay, we get to the point of losing lucidity, losing our conscience. It can result in temporary or permanent loss of conscience for the present incarnation, because it's the incarnated person who loses the conscience, not the spirit, right? Need to remember that part. So when it gets to this stage, it becomes both physical and psychic, right? And this comes from the book Nas Fronteiras da Loucura, Manuel Filomeno de Miranda. And it has such simple explanations of subjugation in the very beginning of the book, and I really recommend the reading. And it also has an example of an abortion that went terribly wrong and ended up with the spirit who had agreed to be his enemy's child. When he was rejected and expelled from the mother, he started hating them again and became their obsessor.
I don't know if you're going to mention, but it's important to understand how the obsession process happens. So it's not just coming, so in that case, the spirit that was aborted just tried to influence. That mother has opened up the channel to that interference, right?
Yeah.
So would be guilty or whatever. We don't have a lot of time to talk about that now.
Yeah, we don't.
And the obsession starts. It doesn't go directly to subjugation, like it would start slower, and then it goes to development.
Yeah. It starts as a simple obsession, and then
Yeah.
as she gives
Yeah.
more room
Yes.
or not, it can
Yes.
progress to subjugation
Yeah.
or not.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now, the worst of all, and it's something Luis talked about last year, suicide by abortion. This is the one, there's a special chapter in the book, Memoirs of a Suicide, about it. Extremely graphic. And the book explains that this one is the crime against divine law that carries the highest degree of responsibility because it's both murder and suicide. So those 22,000 cases in developing countries that end up in death because of the abortion fall here, suicide by abortion, when the act of abortion leads that woman to die. So the book Memoirs of a Suicide explains that it may take centuries or more for that woman to become healthy again. It even mentions that some of them have done that so many times and have gone to such a level. Some of them actually self-subjugation because they feel so guilty that even if the obsessor spirits are not there, she obsesses herself with the memory of all her crimes. And some of them, they go into such a state that they have no conditions of incarnating on earth anymore. That's how serious it can get when we lack the consciousness, right? So it could take centuries, and it can lead to physical, in their next incarnation, and of course for spiritual deformity, insanity. They are tortured by their own memories that are relived over and over again. So they are obsessed many times by other spirits, but every time in these cases by themselves because of the memories of the mistakes they made. And they are marked by a mental reproduction. They reproduce a mental reproduction of all the fetuses they aborted. And the book says that they saw some women showing 3, 5, 10 mental images of fetuses that those women had aborted. So I recommend Memoirs of a Suicide, and it's chapter 6, and it talks about specifically women and the role that we have as a mother, how sacred and important that is. So I leave you with this one. The possible consequences for fathers, I don't leave you with this one, there's one more. The possible consequences for fathers and other people involved, doctors, midwife, nurse, or anybody who is involved in the process of an abortion, are similar to most of the consequences for the mother. So the father can also suffer in his reproductive system. Genitals, internal, because he will also have the same imbalance in his reproductive chakra and base chakra, but usually to a lesser degree. Usually, because if it's, for example, the person that makes the woman abort or something like this, then again, the responsibility shifts, right? Again, aggravating, attenuating circumstances. And there is an example in Nosso Lar, chapter 31. There's an example of a person who performed abortions. It's a lady who comes to the walls of Nosso Lar asking for help. And then the vigilant there tells André Luiz, can you see dark spots? And when he counts, I think there were 58. And that woman was a professional who she made abortions. And she had aborted 58 fetuses in other women. So, and they talk about, in that case, how helping that woman was not possible at that moment. So again, long chapter, recommend the reading. And now I leave you with this one. In every disrespect to the law, there are attenuating, and aggravating circumstances. Every case is different. No hard rule, no rule of thumb. Some consequences or some cases are very consistent because they make sense, but there isn't, we can't state every time you make this mistake, this will be the consequence, because there are attenuating and aggravating circumstances. I'm sorry, I know we really rushed through, but it was a lot of information and I
Well, and we can't.
ate 5
say-
minutes from yours.
Yeah, that's okay. And we can't say that if someone is having, for example, trouble conceiving now, it's because they need an abortion. We have to be very careful with this kind of
Mhm.
views.
It's
as
assumption and judgment.
Yeah.
And your Anna is gonna talk exactly about that. So first slide biography, second slide biography, third slide of biography.
Wow.
I can make it available somewhere if anybody's interested, okay? Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, thanks. So we'll continue now, going towards the end of our workshop today. So this is, after hearing all of these numbers and consequences, and sometimes those are very emotional, brings us emotional feelings. But we also want to talk about comforting. I'm actually gonna write here a couple words. And I'll see if I can do that. Well, I may speed up a little bit some of the slides. Just this one, right? Okay, so these would be our agenda. I'm actually going to skip that because we're going to talk about these things, so we don't have to take too long for that. So just some reflections for us to start thinking, and those reflections can be revisited after we hear all the seminar workshops and even with our lives, because we are here today are talking about abortions, but we do make mistakes in our lives, and abortion is also a mistake that someone can commit. How do I feel when I make a mistake? Is there eternal condemnation? Is that right?
Yeah.
Can I fix my mistakes? How and when? Do I have the right to judge? Self-forgiveness or guilt? Which feeling helps a person to improve? So from that perspective, we know, and especially when we talk about consequences of abortions or any kind of mistakes we have, guilt is the word or the feeling that we have, that we relate to. It could be conscious or unconscious guilt. It can be from previous lives, could be from these mistakes for this life. But guilt is a feeling that is not positive. So we're going to try to talk a little bit about that and how we can change this guilt into a different, more positive way to repair our mistakes and see ourselves as people that deserve to have more chances.
Maybe transform the guilt into a virtue.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Okay. So this is a passage of Jesus and the woman taken in adultery. I think most of us will know this passage.
We worked with the kids.
Yeah. So Jesus has sat down in the temple to teach some of the people after he spent the previous night at the Mount of Olives. A group of scribes and Pharisees confront Jesus, interrupting his teaching session. They bring in a woman, accusing her of committing adultery, claiming she was caught in the very act. They ask Jesus whether the punishment for someone like her should be stoning, as prescribed by the Mosaic law. Jesus first ignores the interruption and writes on the ground as though he does not hear them. But they insist. But when the woman accusers continued their challenge, he states that the one who is without sin is the one who should cast the first stone. The accusers and congregants depart, leaving Jesus alone with the woman. Jesus asks the woman if anyone has condemned her. She answers that no one has condemned her. Jesus says that he too does not condemn her and tells her to go and sin no more. So this is from the Gospel of John, chapter 8. And I don't know what the 11 verses. Okay. So I know it was a long text, but it's just to remind us that the same way that Jesus do not condemn us, we should not condemn ourselves from our mistakes. We can learn from them. We can change this guilt and turn into a virtue, but we are not here to judge, right? No one should. And yes, that doesn't say that it's okay to be keeping mistakes lightly and then not care about them, but it's our posture, what we do with facing the mistakes that we make, that's going to change the way we live our lives. And again, we are not here to judge, and I think that's very important to remind ourselves, because we are here in the Spiritist Center, we are hearing all of these, we are talking about law of compassion, understanding, but in our daily lives, when we see someone, do we really think that way? Are we able to try to not judge? We are still apprentices of life, so we're going to make these assumptions too, but it's the exercise, the practicing this understanding that will make a difference. Including through the consoling or comforting someone that comes to us, or that we hear that is facing a challenge and has made a mistake, as serious as an abortion. I do have a bit of a hard time because I tend to try to look there. But
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to try to hurry a little bit. So the Spirit's book, question 1006. Can the duration of a spirit's suffering be eternal? Of course, if they were eternally wicked. I find this answer was so, and the next one, so interesting how the spirits responded, like they're talking to us, like, what do you think, right? So it's very long, so I kind of broke down a little bit. So, of course, if they were eternally wicked, if were to never repent or atone. So, well, let's read everything. God created them simple and ignorant, and all of them must progress in due course according to their will. It follows, oh, that's another one, sorry. I think I just got a lot and I just with one slide. So basically, I just want to bring that question for us to understand that the spirit suffering, or what would people call punishment, because suffering is something that it's the way we are dealing with the consequences of our acts. We can do by suffering, we can do by, pain, or we can do by accepting that and not feel that suffering as much. But it's just to point out that it's not eternal. So we will overcome, and we'll be able to repay and to repair our mistakes. And the last two sentences, but especially here, all of them, so all of us will progress in due course according to their will. So it will happen, it will depend on us. even repairing our mistakes. So the other question, 1009, it follows then, because again, we know that the Spirit's book has the way the questions are. There's some questions in between, and that will make more sense if we read the whole story, but I won't have time now, and that will be homework for whoever wants to get more. So it follows then that atonements imposed on spirits are never eternal. Do you know what atonements mean? Yeah, expiation, reparation of a wrongdoing or something like that. So again, following the other questions, so it's trying to confirm. So, wrong buttons. How many times did I press it? The atonements imposed. Okay, I don't know now. It's this one, right? Slowly. I won't use the red dots. So he's asking them, the atonements imposed are never eternal. So just to confirm, so ask your common sense, your reason, whether perpetual condemnation for a few moments of error would not be a negation of God's goodness. So if God is that perfect being, that is love, compassion, how could God condemn someone eternally for a mistake? And I found that other sense super interesting. Do you understand this word? Never-ending torture, suffering, and hopelessness for a few mistakes. Does such an idea not repulse you? This is not the God of Christians who places love, charity, mercy, and forgiveness in the ranks of the most important virtues. It is not an incongruity to attribute both infinite love and infinite vengeance to God. So again, I think we don't really need to explain, but it's just again to show that even we sometimes feel the need to, by guilty, to feel that we're condemned forever or our mistakes cannot be fixed. It's an example that, yes, the suffering will end, depending on us, and no condemnation is eternal. And there's one more. I'll just read the last one. Is it not unkind to subject people to horrible everlasting punishment? So, actually, there's one more. Oh, that's very long. And here it's just to finalize, sublime justice combined with kindness makes the duration of atonement contingent on the efforts of the guilty person to improve, to each according to his or her deeds. So that's both ways. Our mistakes will have consequences, and our good doings, the things good that we do, will also be our best advocates. Okay, so now that's what I was trying to come to. So guilt is a feeling. I'm not sure, like, would that be a passion or is that how they call it? Yeah.
From the ego, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that it could be a good sign. It could help us actually when we feel guilty about doing something wrong, can make us actually, if we feel guilty about something that we did wrong, it means we are starting to think about that wrongdoing. But from going to that feeling guilty to then now I don't deserve anything, I'm going to self-punish, I'm going to do this, my life is horrible, I don't deserve anything, to a different posture. That's what I would like to bring today, is the importance of self-forgiveness.
Just maybe to help understand. Joana de Angelis, she talks about two kinds of guilt, and she talks about one guilt that she calls lucid guilt, which is the one that is healthy, the one that you recognize the mistake and you feel let's say, guilty to the right amount that will make you want to change. And then
Yes.
there's the guilt that will lead to self-judgment, self-condemnation, and self-punishment, but that doesn't lead you to change. So the lucid guilt is the one that we can turn into self-forgiveness, and then the other guilt is just makes us suffer, but doesn't help us change. Sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. Well, then I need to speed up a little bit. So I got now another reflection, self-forgiveness or guilt. I could talk a little bit about that. Which feeling helps the person to improve and review a mistake? So that was just to introduce this reflection. So this is a text from this book, Love, Unbeatable Love, Joanna Diogenes, chapter 9. So that again, it's my attempt to translate, Google Translator and myself, so hopefully we'll be okay. The undiluted guilt tears the beam, whether consciously or not, imposing the need to repair the damage caused. So that is again the negative kind of guilt, right? Because it's just self-punishment. For this reason, the forgiveness of the wrongdoing is of relevant importance. Because forgiveness is the way we can overcome the guilt and actually do a process of reparation and changing that wrongdoing, fixing the problem, the situation, if as much as possible. Not always we can fix exactly the way it was, but we can work towards that. Not only to those who attack, so the forgiveness should be done not only to those who attacked, accused, or slander, but also and especially himself or whoever the person. Is it indispensable that the individual allow himself the right of error, considering, however, the duty of reparation? Through those efforts, he overcomes the embarrassment that the conscience of the equivocation imposes on him. So if we think about in our day-to-day, right? Let's say I have a paper to finish at school and I keep postponing. That thing's in my mind all the time. But when I finish that, I feel like, oh, okay, this weight is out of me. Doesn't mean that I can get away with not doing the papers. You have to do it. But when I do, I feel so much better, right? Let's just illustrate. So basically, what I'd like to highlight in this is, attempt the little button. The individual allow himself or herself the right of error. Why do you think that we should have the right of error or to make mistakes?
Because we're simple.
Yeah,
And we're learning.
we are learning, exactly.
In the process of learning, we have to make errors.
Yeah. Exactly. We are not perfect, so we have to learn. And a lot of times guilt can also come from, I don't want to make a mistake. I want to be perfect. And I mean, we're not going to go too deep into this because this is like, just from Spiritist art, there's like 6 video hours, and there's a lot more information for each one. And this will be like lots of books. But just to kind of remember that we are allowed to make errors. But the thing is, we have the duty of reparation. This is not a permissive attitude to new mistakes, but a right of being human. I found this statement so interesting. To achieve success or misfortune in their undertakings, learning through experimentation.
Yeah, experimentation, right? We try. We don't have to make mistakes,
Yeah.
but if they happen, it is the experimentation. Sometimes it will go right, sometimes it will go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back and fix what was
And
wrong.
there was, I think they were saying like, we have because we are still human, That's why we still make mistakes. When we become angels, then this right we won't need the right to make mistakes, I'd say that.
And this experimentation also, I think, brings back the concept of we need the life in the body.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
reincarnate. We need the
Reinforce
opportunity
demonstration.
exactly to experiment and learn from our mistakes and our successes too.
And learning through the mistakes too, and the way, depending on how we deal with them, that's how it's part of the process of repairing our mistakes as well. So just to finish, oh, that's another one. So that's actually can go there. That is, again, talking a little bit before was the guilty and trying to, it's very summarized, trying to talk about from guilty to forgiveness, how important it is that we forgive ourselves, but in a proactive way, using this guilt, the feeling of guilt to transform into forgiving ourselves, but also working towards dealing with our wrongdoings and fixing them as much as possible, and working in a way that, yes, we are princes of life. We know that we're going to make mistakes, but we are responsible for them. No, not to be afraid of them, but to be conscious about what we have to do. So this is also another text from Jonah D'Angelo's book. This book is called Existential Conflicts. This is in the chapter 6. See, the antidote to guilt is forgiveness. So this is a little bit more straight to the point. This forgiveness can be directed to oneself, to whom was the victim, to the community, to nature. So it goes on. So to change the guilt to forgiveness, to change from this guilt feeling to a positive or to a virtue is through forgiveness. And again, self-forgiveness, because how can we forgive someone if we do not know how to forgive ourselves? So that's why in the other text, I believe it says, especially forgiveness special to self first, right? We can work together. We are working on forgiving other people while we are learning how to forgive ourselves too. But if we don't apply the same, I need to forgive because that's what is expected, but I don't apply on myself, that won't be a valid attempt to actually achieve forgiveness or self-forgiveness, that virtue. Since peace and guilt cannot coexist together, I cannot have guilt and still be or try to achieve that peace of mind that we are working towards getting. Since peace and guilt cannot coexist together because one eliminates the presence of the other, it becomes necessary to exercise the understanding of one's own weaknesses. So that's interesting because it invites us to not just accept that, yes, we made a mistake, but what are the reasons behind it? Why did I make that mistake? Why I may be going through the same again? Why, in the case of an abortion, why a person, and we have lots of examples in the Spiritist literature, why someone has done once, twice, in previous lives, and now they're repeating the same mistakes. We are not here to do that, but it's an invitation to go through and look inside of us and see what's the self-reflection, self-consciousness, let's say, and to think about what's inside of us, what we need to work on. Because a lot of times our mistakes are to cover or to escape from a reality that we don't want to see, and then we kind of go in another direction to avoid, to deal with it's really inside of us that need to be addressed. Again, we're talking a bit more general here, not just the abortion itself, but it's important that the parents or the moms or whoever is involved in the process, or even if the person did not commit an abortion but thought about it, that's enough sometimes for people to feel so guilty that they cannot even think about having another child in this life or things like that. So it's important to understand that, yes, we can make mistakes, we can repair, we're not here to judge, and forgiveness and self-forgiveness. Aware of the error, it becomes feasible to seek a form of reparation. Why do you think, or do you think, that if we know that we made a mistake and we know what is a mistake, why is that easy to, or feasible, I like the word feasible, it's possible, to seek a form of reparation?
I can't repair or fix something that I don't know that is wrong or what is wrong with it.
Exactly. So it seems like very easy for us to understand why, but a lot of times we try to do things, we do things thinking that we are repairing, but we are not necessarily dealing with the root of the error or the problem. All right. Okay, so we are going again. It seems that we went too fast through self-forgiveness. If you have any questions, you can. There's a lot of literature about, and just continuing that, we go again to the Spirit's book. Question 1000. Can we redeem our faults in our present life? Yes, so that's one of the things I don't know how to do. Like, I put the first and then you click a button and then the rest appears. I don't know how to do that. Sorry about that.
I can show you how to do that.
Well, I was going to attempt yesterday, but it was too late. Like, I'm going to just leave it. So, yes, we can redeem our faults in the present life by making amends to them. God does not value a fruitless repentance that is easily completed and costs no more than a mere smiting of the chest. The loss of a small finger while doing good for others erase more wrongdoing than any amount of self-inflicted torture undergone solely for one's self-interest. Wrongdoing can only be atoned by doing good. And attempts at making amends are worthless if they affect neither one's pride nor one's material interests. So this answer is quite, I had a very hard time taking some parts away, but it's very clear here that yes, we can start redeeming our faults by making amends to them. But we have to remember that not always we're not going to fix wrongdoing by doing the very opposite. So let's say if, I know there are some examples that should not be said in my opinion, but some people would say, as Renata said, in the websites or people in blogs responding questions, supposedly spiritists. And they say, well, if you committed an abortion now, you have next life, you'll have a cancer, or next life, you can have children. Or, then go work in an orphanage. So then you repay your debts by working with children. Or go adopt a child. That's not how it works. It comes from the heart, that feeling of going through help other children, it's really coming from the heart. That could be a way to repair, but not as a bargain. I'm going to do this, so then I can redeem that. So making amends to our mistakes doesn't mean the eye by eye or someone, now I committed abortion, so I know that next life I'm going to be a spirit that will be aborted. doesn't make sense with the divine laws, with the justice of God, right? So
Even the example that we have in 2 books of mothers who already had kids, had an abortion like at a
Yeah.
4th or
Yeah.
3rd kid, and it's like they still have like 1st and 2nd, and then
Yeah.
some consequences will show up later. So
Exactly.
again, no
Yeah.
hard rule.
yes, and also depending on how you deal with that, like you may have some expiation or even some, use the word,
Trial.
trials. But depending on how we deal with what we did wrong, our trials will be there, but our expiation could be not as, may not suffer as much, let's say, or not go through such a hard process. It is hard working for sure. It's not lightly. We all always have the consequences of our acts, good or bad, but doesn't mean that I have to pay by the same way or eye for an eye or things like that. So that's really important to understand. And again, wrongdoing can only be atoned by doing good. So we know that if someone does something bad to me and I do something bad in that exchange or in return, I'm doing something good, bad again. So the cycle will never end. And again, just to remember that it doesn't have to be exactly the same way. If I'm doing something good from the heart, knowing that I have changed it, I understand that what I made was a mistake, I'm trying to repair. Yes, I will deal with those consequences, but I am already starting to repair, to repay my wrongdoings if I am truly changed the way I feel and the way I live my life. While we're trying, because we're all trying, we're not perfect there.
You read my mind.
Yeah. Just to finish up, not finish, just to go to that point, also talking about. So there is this saying from Peter 1, I'm not going to know how to say epistle, no, epistle, from Peter chapter 4, verse 8. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And some translations say charity, right? And some say love. Again, how can we start repairing or being able to console ourselves and comfort ourselves facing mistake we make or even to others is through love, through good. So love covers over a multitude of sins. So can I hate someone? Can I hate myself? And then I'm going to be, if I hate myself for something wrong I did, am I going to be able to do the expiation and pay for it? No, because I am inflicting more pain on myself instead of trying to make my situation, let's say my situation better, right? Something came across my mind and I forgot again. There was this saying too, I will remember and then I will talk about it. It came twice and I didn't talk right away. Okay, so a process of reparation or not fixing, but like overcoming that process of guilt and trying to turn it into a positive. How do I go from making a mistake and now trying to make this into a positive outcome for myself after I know that I have done something wrong? So the first point is become aware of the mistake. And that's when oftentimes guilt, the feeling of guilt helps too. Yes, if I feel guilt, and a lot of times it's unconscious, we don't know exactly why we feel guilt about something. And it's brought from previous lives, previous experiences. But we may not, in that case, may not be able to have that. But in this life, become aware of the mistake. Then we can repentance, which means what repentance means. Regret. So we understand that we made a mistake and we regret. We understand it was wrong. I think that the best translation is remorso, so we did in Portuguese, right? No. Sorry. Arrependimento, yes. That's, remorse is not that good. Yeah. Anyways, I won't go there. So I understand and I feel that that was wrong, and I really understand that was not the right thing to do. And I feel bad about having done that.
Yeah, and just vocabulary.
Mhm.
Repentance is regret, but in the sense that I feel like I need to do something
Yes.
to repair.
Yeah.
So it's like
Thank you.
one step ahead of just regret.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. So
Remorso e culpa, né?
Yes.
yeah, could be. Yeah. So then, because we have that understanding that we have to do something about it, then we should analyze the situation. And not to make excuses for ourselves, not to think, oh, I did this or I committed, let's say, an abortion because this and this and this. That's not pointing making excuses, because if we make excuses, we're not really working on going forward. But we also don't want to go back to guilt. We want to make this into something that we can progress and learn with them. So analyze situation. So for example, nowadays, would I do that again? If I'm facing with the same challenge, would I do that again? Some people might think that they might do, or they may end doing the same mistake for different reasons. But in that specific situation, would I do it again? What were the circumstances that maybe, so kind of to being responsible about that mistake and assuming the responsibility for it. Learn with that mistake, because if we don't learn anything, we are not really progressing. And if we don't learn anything, we cannot be ready to repair the mistake. Okay? I'm trying to learn. Okay, I think we're doing pretty good. So when I was thinking about our role, the idea was not, for me, it was not to try to bring solutions, because that's not what we can do. We can't tell people what to do because we don't know. Everyone has a journey, a process. Everyone has a way to go through the situations, and everyone has the free will to make their decisions. But the idea that came to me was maybe bringing some suggestions of comforting approaches or consoling approaches for someone who commits or is thinking about committing an abortion. And again, everything that we heard today, there will be resources that we could talk to the person, either after the fact or if someone comes and talks to us. And Victor brought that slide with so many resources. It's so interesting to know that there are so many things there. But when the person is stuck on that situation, with that problem, they may not be able to see what's out there. They may not have the means to look for that information, or emotionally or psychologically, they may not know that there are different options. So I think our role would be to kind of help these people, and even ourselves, of course, in those situations. So one of the things, the suggestions would be educate about what the doctrine of the spirits explain about abortion. Again, we have to be very careful, because if someone that had committed an abortion comes to us and we talk about the consequences, that's not going to help, right? We have to be sensitive to how to explain But in the case of someone who is thinking about, then we can approach in a different way and show here there's the consequences. And again, it has to be very conscious, in a conscious way to each situation. But it's important that we bring the consoler to everyone, not just on the consoling part, but also in the education part, to inform people what is the Spiritist and what Jesus would do, like bringing the gospel of Jesus, of course, together because it's part of the doctrine. Practice listening. I find specifically that a lot of times people just need to talk, and while they're talking, they can oftentimes even find different solutions or think about the situation more clearly. Again, those are suggestions, and that's why I wrote practice, because it's a practice that we have to do too. Because when someone approaches us with a problem, we want to give solutions, right? Usually that's how we do, and it's not up to us to tell what people do. We can help find some possible solutions. Practice non-judgment, because it is hard sometimes not to lie. I catch myself so many times like, oh, there's anticonceptions, there's ways to prevent, why you're not doing. And then, but it's not up to us to judge, right? If Jesus did not judge the adulterer woman, why would we judge someone, right? If possible, help thinking about options. Are there options? What can we do? And then comes to the resources in the community to help mothers, children, fathers, family. Are there resources? What are the resources? For example, I know that here in Calgary, there is a school for teenage girls that when they are pregnant or after they have the baby, they can go to that high school and they have a child care for the child, for the baby. So they don't have to stop schooling for that. And I think for everything in our life, that's the golden rule. Do to others what would like to be done to us. So we're not here to condemn. We're not here to judge. We're not here to say that make mistakes are okay. Let's keep doing. But we know that mistakes are part of our learnings, and if we use those mistakes to learn to improve, that's the right way to use them and to achieve our enlightenment, to help ourselves and others. And self-forgiveness is something that we have to practice now, should practice in our personal lives, right? For us, because otherwise we can't help. And I think there's one more. My bibliography is not as long as Renata. I just wrote here what I actually put in the slides, but for my studies there is also more material. And again, if we look, we just have so much information. All right.
Reliable information.
Reliable, yeah. And sometimes if we're not sure, ask your Spiritist center, ask the people that are studying a little bit more, because they might be able to help understand if that's a true source. But again, remember that those people that put some things in the internet, most of the time their intentions are good. We just don't want to. If we want to learn, we should try to go through the truth. Teachings, reliable resources, and there is a lot of information just from some books. I would say some, there are lots, but that's what it is. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Not too bad.
Awesome.
Yeah, I just didn't read some of my notes. All right, thank you.
We're coming back in 10
Thank you,
minutes.
Anna.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Vitor, eu tô tentando te ligar no celular, se puder atender. Aliás, Vitor ou Moa?
Boa tarde, Eric. Estamos ouvindo?
Olá, estou sim.
Obrigado por fazer a palestra, nosso fechamento, nossa última palestra.
Ok. Vocês me ouvem bem?
Não entendi.
Vocês me ouvem bem?
Umas caixas. A altura tá boa, mas aqui são umas caixas.
Não.
A altura tá boa, mas como as caixas elas são muito graves, então fica bem abafado. Mas dá pra ouvir, sim. Falando bem devagarinho, a gente ouve bem.
Dá para mexer um pouco ali na qualidade do som. Né? Se conseguir corrigir um pouco durante, melhor, senão...
Tá melhor, sim.
Ok. Deixa eu fazer uma coisa aqui para ver se melhora um pouco também, botar um fone de ouvido. Melhorou?
Fala mais.
Melhorou um pouco agora? Tá me ouvindo bem?
Fala com a voz bem fininha, fica melhor ainda.
Isso é mais difícil. Eu vou ter que pedir para alguém fazer isso por mim. Felizmente, não nasci com esse dote. Okay, shall we start?
Yes.
Very well. First of all, I would like to ask you to apologize me for not being with you today. As probably you have learned, I was sick and this morning due to the whole family being sick here, and I'm pretty sure that none of you would like to get my stomach flu, and it was incredible fast how quick I got in yesterday night around 11 p.m. Helped Sophie because she was having some issues, and this morning I woke up feeling not too well, and in the end I got the stomach flu. So hopefully we have the technology today that can still connect us, and I have been listening since the beginning our workshop, and you guys made a great job. You have run through all the subjects that truly matter right now in our specific society. I am sure that we have collected a lot of information here, and absolutely none of the one single word that you have studied to prepare this workshop was a waste of time. It is a great deal. It is a great want of our society, especially in Canada, with no legislation, as our dear Sonia has informed us. And I will try to cover a little bit of what each one of you have presented. Just a quick refresher, so then we can get to our closure. But before I go for further, I would like to thank you all. My sincere thanks for you all being there, preparing this, informing our society, having this available in the internet so everybody can always come and watch it, and hopefully our friends from the spiritual world who are also watching us, I'm pretty sure that they have been getting a lot of consciousness in these last few hours. So thank you very much. We will go through, as I mentioned, before a little bit of each one of you presentation to remind, since you all build up the business case of why Spiritism doesn't agree to any type of abortion. And we will get to the end to understand what is really our right, what is our goal as spiritists in our society. And bear with me. If you have any question, please interrupt me whenever you want. Feel free to make your questions, make your notes, and we will together finish this wonderful workshop. All right, so to start, I would like to, and if my computer helps, I would like to bring to you an important text that's in the book Tales and Epilogues from the Spirit Brother X, also known as Humberto de Campos, or Humberto de Campos, psychography from Francisco Xavier. Especially this text touches us a lot because it was a claim that I am almost 100% sure that we fulfill today. The whole thing passes in a hospital, a spiritual hospital. And as you know, our material world is just a matter of reflection of the spiritual world. So the hospitals up there are not, or down there, are not totally different than ours. Some of them have more technology, some of them are less evolved than ours. But in this case, the whole passage is going through in a hospital, a spiritual hospital. When our brother X is walking through the hospital with some mentors, and a poor creature imploring him said, "Can you please write to Earth?" And then he answered, "Yes, well, when they allow me." But when he noticed again how the appearance of that lady was, he could see memories of death on her. He could see tears of anguish, skeletal display that even Dante, in his words, wouldn't be able to describe the suffering and the terror that she was passing through. And she kept crying, "Write, write, please, write down." But write down what? To whom? To women. Women, answered the unfortunate woman. Claim then to do not flee the noble and dignified marriage, especially the maternity. Don't let the selfishness and idleness get in the marriage and waste your time. And while she was speaking, the brother X noticed that lots of pain she was feeling, so she could speak. And in the middle of the tears, she continued, I was on Earth for almost half a century. And then, when disincarnated and back to the spiritual world, I was invited to return to the material arena, where I would marry an old friend of mine, Claudio, a devoted and faithful husband. We pledged to collect 8 little children, 8 hearts from their own spiritual past, which they were directly or indirectly connected through the cruelty or indiscipline of their past. And now they were invited to renew their spirit of these 8 little children. And they would be the parents who would reborn their failures, who would be correcting their little moral mistakes in order to help them to evolve. Already on Earth, married with Claudio, she had her first baby, Paul, who was tender like a pearl in their hands. And due to the first maternity, she didn't feel as well with her commitments. She had a lot of unsatisfaction being a mom. As we saw earlier today, our dear Victor presenting many of women claim that they are not here to babysitting children. And in the middle of this repentance of being a mother of one, she decided not to have any other children. So all the other 7 children that they were supposed to have were let by their own. And with that, crimes started emerging. And 12 times, she practiced the abortion of these spirits that they were supposed to come through them. Connected to material life, she was enjoying her fashion ways to live. Claudio, her husband, is spending a fortune to supply all her materialistic way of thinking. And this boundness of connection with their other children that they didn't have started creating a process of obsession. So these spirits that were supposed to reborn in their family felt that they were abandoned, felt that they had the right to reincarnate, and this poor lady and her husband had a lot of misfortune. Claudio has disincarnated after all the obsession process, even getting involved in drugs and drinking. Her youngest son, or the only son, Paul, has also died in a terrible accident. And all this was dragging her to madness. Making the whole story short, after her disincarnation, feeling all the pain, going to the umbrals or the areas to expiate all the bad deeds she has done, which she was still expiating while she was telling the story. She finalized this important message telling us, speak from my experience to all married and robust sisters who are in health for the sweet and holy sacrifice of motherhood. Help them to think. Do not turn marriage into a greenhouse of intoxicating and unproductive flowers, whose poison perfume will cut you off in the direction of darkness. Tell them something of the martyrdom that you are seeing in my disease. And then, after that, the poor little woman, without any energy, any forces anymore, went to her chamber to rest. And thinking about it, Brother X really reflect how important this message was. And probably 70 years later now, we're using probably more than 5,000 miles away from where it was written by Francisco Xavier, and we are having the opportunity to share it, to learn from the experience of all the ones who chose the misfortune path in the maternal life. With this important text, I would like to invite you for our initial reflection. As a whole, does our society lives in a conscious state of mind? Do you feel like living in full consciousness? When and where does life starts? Does our society really respect life? With these important questions, we bring the image of an iceberg, reminding that our whole society lives 5 to 10% in a conscious way, and all the remaining 90 to 95%, we're still working as machines. We don't reflect, we just live. And our reflection today is all about it. Mainly reflecting about what is Spiritism role in it. Well, in the question 799 of the Spirit's book, Kardec asks the spirits, in what way can Spiritism contribute to progress? And the answer is very important because fully connect us to the main reason abortions happen, by destroying materialism, one of the sources of society. It enables people, Spiritism enables people to comprehend where their true interests lie. Since the future life is no longer veiled by doubt, men and women will be will better understand that they can ensure their future based on the present. The main reason of abortion today is that we chose a materialistic way of life. Our society as a whole have the information as we talked. We all have the sources, but we choose to live for the world. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, in the chapter 6, item 5, the Spirit of Truth tells us, I am also moved with compassion for your miseries, your great weakness, not to extend a sore hand to those wayward unfortunates who, sin heaven, fall into the abysses of error. Believe, love, and meditate upon the things that are being revealed to you. Do not mix tares with the good seed, utopias with truth. This is an important invitation for all of us. The continuation of this text, I'm pretty sure all of you know, because the next paragraph, the Spirit of Truth says, O Spiritists, love one another. Here is the first teaching. Educate yourselves. Here is the second. But this invitation that he says here is also an important invitation for us all. Be moved with compassion for the miseries and weaknesses of this world that we live in. We are all invited to embrace with belief, love, and reflection, meditation upon what are we doing here? Why are we here? And Spiritism is probably one of the best tools that I know to bring us up to consciousness. In today's reflections, our dear Luis answered this wonderful question with his 45 minutes of the light of Spiritism. How does Spiritism bring up to conscience? Promoting instruction, unveiling the ignorance, consoling the wounds created by our own ignorance, and stimulating each one of us to be better beings. Have we achieved it today? Well, let's see. Do we know what Spiritism says about abortion?
Yes.
And the question 360, our brother Luis again brought it in his wonderful presentation, revealing that, yes, the fetus should be treated as a child or any other one of us? The answer is very clear when the Spirit says, you should see the will of God and the divine handiwork in everything, and not treat lightly the things you ought to respect. Life is something that we are ought to respect. Everything follows according to God's designs, and no one is called upon to judge them. And then we reflected with our dear Sonia if our society follow or not the divine law. And in the question 358, we learned that the artificial abortion is a crime. Is a crime because it transgress God's law. The law that is in our conscience. The law that always claims us to be better each day. And it is because of these transgressions we talked today, most of the women who have committed abortion fall into a deep depression because they didn't know what was the reason they were doing. They just thought, I don't want to be a babysitter. I don't want to have a child in my 20s, in my early 30s. We have to be very clear here that we are not condemning anyone for their choices, but we are bringing the clear vision of Spiritism, which is fully connected to the divine laws about this important subject. A little later, our dear Victor has told us about how big is this unconsciousness. With numbers, with breaths, we could see that 25% of the pregnancies around the world are due to abortion. This is a huge number. It's a quarter. 1 in 4 kids or 4 pregnancies will end up in abortion. This is a lot. This is a lot. And another pragmatic information that our dear Victor has brought us is the age of the ones who choose this path. Girls, they're 17 years old, robust young women till they're 30 years old are more than half of the total abortions in Canada. This is a huge number. And this is a full connection with the claim of that poor creature that was begging Brother X to let the other women don't do what she did. Imagine how many girls, young women, will be following the same path of the lady, mainly because they chose the material world instead of the true life. Lately, our dear Renata has told us about the consequences, the physical consequences, the disease, the spiritual consequences, obsessions, suicides, pain and suffering. The Spiritist literature is full of cases trying to remind us how important it is to respect life, how important it is to be conscious in an unconscious world. Then later, our dear Anna has brought a lot of reflections about how comfort our society. And I would like to add something, dear Anna, which is the most beautiful invitation that Jesus has made to each one of us to stop this suffering, stop the pain, and follow him. Come to me, all you who are exhausted and overloaded, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus' yoke is nothing more and nothing less than love. If we follow love, we are answering this wonderful invitation of Jesus. If we can find love in that little being that has just been copulated and sometimes already been hated, we will find love in our own hearts. And to find comfort in ourselves, we have to will it. Willingness to recognize our weaknesses in order to transmute them gradually. That's how it starts the invitation of Jesus. Come to me, recognize your weaknesses. And then this first step will be fulfilled. Identify our weaknesses, lack of knowledge, ignorance. Call it whatever you want. Evil is nothing more than the lack of knowledge. Through knowledge, comprehension of the knowledge, feel the knowledge, and live in the knowledge. To finally realize the impacts of these weaknesses are having in our feelings and behaviors, then initiate, the efforts to change through the process of self-welcoming. This love process of self-welcoming is something that, again, we see so little in our society. We see many people killing themselves on drugs, so many people killing themselves for another great experience, so many people killing others because they don't have love in their own hearts. Well, you might ask then, what is the self-welcoming, Eric? That's so simple to put in words, but can you bring a little more? And we do. The loving self-welcoming is followed by 3 fundamental virtues, all the 5 of them connected to our deep own feelings. Nothing external, all inside of us. Self-love, self-acceptance, self-confidence, self-valorization, and self-respect. The self-love we have already talked a little bit. The self-acceptance, I'm pretty sure that you remember how much Anna talked about not condemning ourselves anymore. We don't need it. We need to find a new way to deal with our weaknesses. Self-confidence, yes. We all lack of confidence most of the time. And many of these young little ladies who commit abortions, they don't feel confident to be mothers, which is another big problem of our society. We don't teach people how to behave in family, which is very sad because the family is the first lab, is the first moment we prepare ourselves to the broader society. The self-valorization, without a doubt, valorizing ourselves is not calling that I don't want to be a babysitter, but valorizing, put a lot of value in God's invitation to be a mother, to be a father, and self-respect. So many of these tentatives of abortion end up in serious diseases, if not the death, as we saw some numbers from Vitor. With self-love, self-acceptance, self-confidence, self-valorization, and self-respect, we can say we love ourselves, we welcome each weaknesses that we have, and we will transmute it to virtues. So then, some might ask, well, what is this self-confidence, or how can, pardon me, how can we access this conscience? Well, we all know that in the conscience are the divine laws. And if we could access them, would we do anything different? But if the divine laws contain all the truth and they help us to be better beings as men and women, what does it mean to us? Well, in the question 880, which Mo started the day today, we have an important, maybe one of the most important questions in the Spirit's book. which is the first of all natural rights of man. We're not talking about the spirit, only the spirit, but the man, the incarnated spirit. And the answer is sublime because it reminds us it is the right to live. And therefore, no one has the right to take the life of his fellow creature or to do anything that may compromise his personal existence. Once again, our day was full of information, full of knowledge. Every time that we attempt to other life, which is really a terrible mistake, a terrible misunderstanding of our society, not giving the value of that little creature which is in the wombs of her mom, of his or her mom. We end up compromising this important question. And the most important, some of them end up compromising their own existence. And as we saw in our previous workshop about suicide, yes, this is also comprehended as an indirect suicide if it ends up compromising the womb, the mother's existence. We are all invited to reflect how important to live is. And in this matter, I would like to invite, I don't know who is in the computer, if you could put the sound very lightly.
Deixa ligar o som bem baixo.
Watching?
So awesome. It's more for you guys than for me, so if it's good for you, it's good for me. We have always to remember that inside the woman there is something happening, something growing, which will end up in what we are today. Every time that we choose to not let these 38 weeks pass and this little baby come to life, we will be creating our own misfortune. We'll reap what we sow. Life matters. Life always matters. Doesn't matter, we saw it today, doesn't matter if it's a little fetus or a 20 years old man, a 40 years old woman. Life matters. Every time that we have the chance to bring all the knowledge we shared today to our brothers and sisters, doesn't matter if they are spiritists or not, we are achieving this important invitation of the question 880. We are allowing the right to live. The right to live of a little baby, the right to live of maybe one of the most prestigious soccer players in the world, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo. His mom more than once thought, and she was advised to commit abortion of him. For more than once, this story repeats. And if we connect ourselves truly to how important is to see life in a different manner, we will see that life is not just when we are connected to this material body. Life started way before our current existence. And it is not the death of this body that will annihilate our life. Because truly, we are all immortal spirits. And even though we chose the wrong path, even though we made a mistake choosing the abortion, choosing to do the abortion in someone, to advise the abortion in someone, as immortal spirits, life will prevail. We will live again and again and again. And as we bring this conscience to the society, I hope we all respect life. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. I truly believe that we all have an important role. We all have tomorrow in our daily lives to remember. Each days or nights of study that we have put in this subject, all the hours we spent together preparing this workshop, all the hours we spent today, and then more and more we will be fulfilling our duty as Spiritists, as Christians, and sons and daughters of God. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody that's participated today, presenting, watching, and seeing us online. Thank you.
Eric, would you like to do our final prayer?
I would wish to participate, but since you are all together there, I would love for one of you to do, please.
Come on.
I was going to say. So let's do it. Okay. Please. Here maybe. So let's think about God, think about Jesus in this wonderful moment where we had the entire day to reflect about abortion, their consequences, and appreciate our center, appreciate all the knowledge that we are gathering every single day. We wish that everybody would have the same appreciation for this workshop, the same way as I did. We wish a blessed week, that we have a wonderful experience with all the teachings of Spiritism in our lives. So be it.
So be it. Thank you very much, guys. Very, very good job. Parabéns a todos aí pelo trabalho. Foi um dia muito gostoso, apesar de eu não estar aí com vocês, mas foi muito bom ouvi-los e ver que vocês estão confraternizando nesse momento tão especial.